The sun cast a golden glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where every house looked just a little too perfect, where the lawns were trimmed to an exact length, and where an unspoken competition raged over who had the most pristine flower beds. It was a community governed by an iron-fisted homeowners association, led by none other than Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of order. Karen had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, and in that time, she had built a reputation for being both meticulous and relentless. She had an uncanny ability to sniff out the smallest infractions. A trash can left out a minute too long, a fence shade slightly off the HOA-approved pallet, or in this case, a sprinkler system that she had arbitrarily decided was a problem. Across the street from Karen's immaculately maintained home, I had lived in relative peace, dodging her nitpicks and absurd violation notices with the patience of a saint. Unlike some of my unfortunate neighbors, I wasn't one to roll over and let Karen's demands dictate my life. I followed the rules to the letter, but I refused to bow to her over-the-top expectations. My lawn was green, my hedges were trimmed, and my sprinkler system was in perfect working order. Or at least, it had been. I first noticed something was off when I saw Karen and two other HOA board members lingering on the sidewalk in front of my house, clipboards in hand. They whispered among themselves, throwing occasional glances in my direction as I sipped my morning coffee on the porch. I knew that look. It was the same look she gave before she sent out one of her infamous violation letters. I sighed and walked down the steps, determined to put a stop to whatever nonsense she was cooking up before it started. "Morning, Karen," I said as casually as possible, though I already knew this conversation wouldn't be pleasant. Karen turned to face me, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her clipboard. "Good morning," she said, her tone sugary sweet, which meant bad news was coming. "We've been reviewing the neighborhood's irrigation systems, and we've noticed that yours is, well, shall we say, problematic." I raised an eyebrow. "Problematic how?" She pursed her lips, flipping through her papers as if she had a stack of documented offenses against me. "It sprays too far onto the sidewalk. It creates excess runoff. And, frankly, it's an eyesore." I stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of what she had just said. "An eyesore? It's a sprinkler system, Karen. It waters my lawn, like everyone else's." Karen gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that people give when they think they're being gracious, but are actually being condescending. "It's not like everyone else's. It's disruptive. We're making adjustments to ensure uniformity in the neighborhood." I crossed my arms. "And by adjustments, you mean what exactly?" She smiled wider, which somehow made her look even less friendly. "Just a few modifications to bring it up to standard." Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop. I didn't know what she was planning, but I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like it. The next morning, something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a strange quietness in the air. Usually I woke up to the soft hiss of my sprinkler system kicking on, a steady rhythm of water hitting grass. But today, nothing. No mist floating in the morning light, just silence. Frowning, I pulled on a hoodie and stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the neighborhood looked as pristine as ever. But as I walked onto my lawn, my gut told me something was wrong. I glanced over at Karen's house. Her blinds shifted. She was watching. I shook off the weird feeling and had headed toward the side of my house where the main valve for my sprinkler system was located. The moment I turned the corner, my stomach dropped. The cover to the irrigation control box had been removed and was lying haphazardly on the ground. The wires inside had been cut, cleanly, deliberately. Someone had tampered with it. Anger bubbled up in my chest. I knew exactly who was behind this. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself before I marched straight across the street. Karen was already standing at her door, as if she had been expecting me. "Morning," she chirped, an insufferably smug look on her face. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Did you touch my sprinkler system?" Her expression remained infuriatingly pleasant. "Now, why would I do that?" I gestured toward the mess by my house. "Someone cut the wires." She feigned surprise, placing a hand over her chest. "Oh dear. That's awful. But you know, it is against HOA policy to have a system that overwaters or causes excess runoff. Perhaps someone took matters into their own hands." I clenched my jaw. You mean you took matters into your own hands? Karen smiled unfazed. I wouldn't say that, but really, you should thank whoever did it. Your system was inefficient and unsightly. Now you have an opportunity to install something more appropriate for the neighborhood. My fists tightened at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. You have no authority to touch my property, Karen. None. She gave a small, condescending laugh. I think you'll find that the HOA bylaws give us quite a bit of authority when it comes to maintaining neighborhood standards. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. This is vandalism. Karen's eyes twinkled with amusement, like she was enjoying this. That's a very strong accusation, but I'm sure you'll find that proving something like that would be rather difficult. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to step back. I could argue with her all day, but it wouldn't change what had already been done. She had sabotaged my sprinkler system, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. She wanted me to react, to get angry enough to make a mistake. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I gave her a curt nod. Fine. She tilted her head. Fine? I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. You'll see. Then I turned and walked away, already planning my next move. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. My lawn sat dry, deprived of its usual morning drink, but I wasn't about to let Karen win. I had already called a repair guy to come take a look, but he wouldn't be able to make it until the next day. That meant one evening without sprinklers. Not a big deal. Or so I thought. As the sun set, I noticed something strange. The ground near the side of my house felt soft, too soft. When I stepped on it, water bubbled up around my shoe. My gut twisted. That wasn't normal. I crouched down, pressing a hand against the damp earth. The more pressure I applied, the more water seeped up, like a sponge already full to the brim. I followed the wet ground along the side of the house, and that's when I heard it. A faint, steady hiss coming from underground. My stomach dropped. That wasn't leftover moisture. That was an active leak. Karen had cut the sprinkler control, but in doing so, she must have damaged the main water line that ran beneath my yard. And now, without a way to regulate it, water was building up under my property. I rushed to the shutoff valve near the curb, hoping I could at least stop the worst of it before things got out of hand. But when I got there, another problem smacked me in the face. The valve was jammed. No matter how hard I twisted, it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone had tampered with it. Someone who wanted to make sure I couldn't turn the water off. Panic started creeping in. If I didn't get this under control, I was looking at serious flooding. And not just a soggy lawn. I was talking about water seeping into my foundation, flooding my basement, destroying my home. I grabbed my phone and dialed the emergency plumber. I need someone out here now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The guy on the other end sighed. Fastest I can do is tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning? By then, I could have a swamp in my front yard. I hung up, jaw clenched, and took a deep breath. I needed to think. A movement across the street caught my eye. Karen, standing in her front window, watching me with a cup of tea in her hands, a small, satisfied smile on her face. She had done this on purpose. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't just wanted to stop my sprinklers. She wanted to create a problem big enough that I'd have no choice but to dig up my yard, install a whole new system, maybe even pay HOA fines for property damage. This wasn't about water runoff. This was about control. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated just how badly she had screwed up. Because when I turned back toward my yard, I noticed something else. The water wasn't just rising on my property. It was seeping into the street, spreading toward her perfectly manicured lawn. And it wasn't stopping. Water pooled at the edges of my lawn, seeping past the curb and trickling onto the pavement, like tiny fingers stretching out in search of more ground to claim. The hissing sound beneath the soil had grown louder, more insistent, and I could feel it now, deep in my gut, that this wasn't just a slow leak. This was something bigger. Something worse. I took a step back, scanning the spreading water. It had already reached the middle of the street, creeping closer to Karen's side. I knew she saw it too. Even from a distance, I could make out the way she clutched her teacup just a little tighter, her fingers gripping the handle like she wanted to crush it. She had wanted to punish me. She had wanted to teach me a lesson. But now, Her perfectly sculpted world was about to get a dose of reality. The first real sign of trouble came when my next-door neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stepped outside to retrieve his evening newspaper. His foot hit the sidewalk, and instead of a solid surface, he found himself ankle-deep in water. He stumbled back, muttering a string of curses, and looked around wildly before his eyes landed on me. "What the hell is going on?" I let out a slow breath. Water mains busted. Sprinkler line got cut. Now the pressure's building up underground. His brows knitted together. Who the hell cut it? I didn't need to answer. His gaze followed mine across the street, straight to Karen's window. The second her name formed in his brain, she vanished behind the curtains like a ghost retreating into the shadows. More neighbors began stepping outside, one by one, drawn by the growing flood. People in their pajamas, people still in work clothes, people with dogs on leashes, who suddenly found themselves standing in what looked like the beginnings of a shallow river. Murmurs of confusion turned into frustration. Where's this coming from? Did someone report a leak? Why is it spreading so fast? Then came the real disaster. With a deep, sickening gurgle, the saturated soil beneath my yard finally gave way. A geyser of muddy water shot up from the ground, spraying in all directions. A pipe had fully burst, and now, instead of a slow, creeping flood, we had a full-scale water eruption. People jumped back as the water surged, carrying bits of lawn and soil with it. I barely had time to react before I saw something even worse. The flood wasn't just limited to my yard anymore. It was washing straight across the street. Karen's once perfect lawn, the one she had spent years obsessively maintaining, was now drowning under an unstoppable wave of dirty water. Her hydrangeas, her pristine white walkway, the little decorative stones she had arranged so precisely, all of it was disappearing under a rapidly growing lake of her own making. And then, like the cherry on top of a karmic sundae, her expensive garden decorations, a set of perfectly arranged ceramic lawn gnomes, began floating away, bobbing on the water like tiny judgmental survivors of a shipwreck. Karen burst out of her house, horror splashed across her face. "What is happening?" I crossed my arms. "Looks like someone cut my sprinkler system and caused a water main break." Her face paled. "That's ridiculous," Mr. Thompson scoffed. "You were just complaining about his system yesterday." "I didn't do anything," she snapped, her voice climbing into that shrill range that only truly guilty people reach. "This is an accident." I gave a slow nod. "Yeah, an accident you caused." More neighbors started chiming in, whispering among themselves, shooting her accusing glances. Karen's carefully curated reputation as the ruler of the HOA was slipping through her fingers, just like the mud washing across her yard. And then, just to make matters worse for her, the city maintenance truck pulled onto the street, its flashing lights cutting through the chaos. A worker in a reflective vest climbed out, assessing the mess with wide eyes. "Jesus," he muttered. "This is worse than we thought." Karen stepped forward, putting on her best concerned citizen act. Yes, it's awful. I was just about to call the city myself." The worker barely looked at her before turning to me. "You the homeowner?" I nodded. "Yeah." He frowned. "We've dealt with breaks like this before, but this one's different. You said someone cut your system?" I nodded again. "Yep, and now we've got a busted water main." The worker turned back to Karen. "You cut into his property's irrigation system?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I may have suggested that his sprinklers needed adjustments." The worker exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, well, you adjusted them straight into a major pipe. This whole section's gonna need to be shut down for repairs." He pointed toward Karen's house, "including your water." Karen paled even further. "What?" He nodded toward the mess. "City's gotta cut the line until we can fix the damage. Could take a few days." The realization hit her like a truck. No sprinklers, no hose, no water for her perfect hydrangeas. Mr. Thompson let out a low whistle. "Wow, karma really doesn't waste time, does it?" Karen turned to me, rage burning in her eyes, but I just smiled. "You wanted my sprinkler system gone, Karen?" I said, gesturing to the chaos. "Well, you got your wish." I turned and walked back into my house, shutting the door behind me. Outside, the flood raged on.